Hello, Anne-Marie. What I thought I'd do was just go through a bit of basic politics. Not going to go into any great in depth, just to give you a little bit of an overview because I think it's what you might be struggling on a little bit. So, what I have done is drawn a line across here. Forget that bottom bit. That's a seesaw. That's going to come into effect later. Now, the middle of the ground you got is the Lib Dems. Now, about sort of like 20 years ago, you could put all of these groups into sort of like different categories, and you could have a nice little stereotype of each. So the middle of the ground would be the Lib Dems, and they'd be your sort of like your Greens and your hippies, sort of like very environmentally friendly people. Now, when you sort of like hear people on the news saying, he's going to the left or the far left or to the right, and particularly you might have heard the far right, what that sort of like means is to the left of centre, you have the Labour Party. The Labour Party sort of like work around sort of well, Labour means work, represents the working class, but I'll go into that in a little bit. And then to the far left, you've got your Marxists and your Socialists, and they sort of like believe in the everybody being equal. Um, Very sort of like old style Russia of sort of like 20 years ago and before. And from your middle ground, then you go to the right, where you got your Conservatives, and they're more sort of like industry based, the bosses. And then to the very far right, you've got your BNP. 20 years ago, that was your National Front, that was your skinhead movement. So, 20 years ago, if you would put all of these people into a lift, if you wanted to stereotype them, you could say that your Lib Dem will be your hippie, your Green Party, very concerned about the environment, very concerned about the foreign affairs. Your Labour Party would be like your trade union leader, very vocal, very sort of like for the workers on the factory floor. Your Marxist would be your sort of old style Russia, sort of like power to the people. Um, there shouldn't really be any sort of like bourgeoisie. Be very everybody in it together. Your Conservative would be like a posh bloke in a bowler hat, and your BNP would be a skinhead. Very simple stereotypes, but that sort of really explains how it was a long time ago. Well, in my youth. But since you were born, they're now sort of like blurring together. If you were to put a Labour, a Lib Dem, and a Conservative in a lift together, they'd all be wearing the same suit, dressed the same way, talk the same way, trying desperately to get your vote. Because votes equals power, which equals money, which equals a job. Because nowadays you have career politicians, whereas not that long ago you didn't. Your Labour MP would be an ex-trade union bloke. Your Conservative would be the person who ran the factory, and your Lib Dem wouldn't really be in power at all because environmental issues weren't that important. And on the grand scale of things, probably still aren't now in the grand. That's why they came third in the general election. So moving on to this, hopefully this is going to explain to it a little bit about the difference between Labour and Conservative. Haven't put the Lib Dems. Yes, they got a lot of power at the moment, but let's be honest, they're going to get absolutely mullered in the next election. So your Labour represents your working class. Traditionally, it represented your working class and was funded by the unions. When you work for a factory, you have to pay a union rep, and part of your subs will go towards funding the Labour Party. And just like anything else, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. The Labour Party was meant to support the working class. Conversely, the Conservatives, you could say, are represented by the bosses of the factory, the gentry, and just generally posh people. They were funded by big businesses, rich people, public school, working class school, private school. Your private school will be your Conservatives. Your Labour school will go to your local comp. It is basically that simple between the two. Now the media as well also plays an effect because you got traditional Labour papers. The Daily Mirror would never slag off Labour. just like the Daily Mail and the Telegraph would never slag off the Conservatives. Now the BBC are non-biased. They're meant to be sort of equal. They're meant to just slag everybody off. But the most important one is probably the Murdoch press, which is your Sky, your Sun, and your Times. And around about election time, Rupert Murdoch, he will pick a side. Normally he knows, you can tell who's going to be winning, and he will back him to the hilt. So, for example, in the 97 election when Blair got in, he backed all of his press, all of his media, said Blair is the shining light to the future. He's going to sort everything out. Everything's going to be wonderful under him. Don't trust the Tories. Just like in the 2010 election, Murdoch backed Cameron. And you could sort of like say that was a very important factor that got the respective governments in. Even though he's Australian, he wants to be able to sort of like be able to influence the press. And again, just like the unions, just like big business, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. Everyone's in it for a self-interest. Unfortunately, the people that lose out are the voters. So some of the important dates you got to remember, or at least think about, or at least know a little bit about. Right, 79, the Conservatives won the election. Thatcher came into power. Thatcher was probably the last leader of this country that if she said she was going to do something, she would do it. Quite straight talking, upset a lot of people. Labour particularly hated her. She took on the unions and beat the unions, particularly the coal miners. That was quite a savage battle. She wasn't going to back down. Scargill had many opportunities to back down and get quite a good deal out of it, but he didn't want to lose face. The Falklands got invaded, and Thatcher sort of like said, we're going to defend the islands, they're British territory, we're going to defend. I mean, you know, they're sort of like down in Argentina. Bit of a brave decision, but she said she was going to do it, and she did it. And, you know, personally, it'd be nice to have a leader these days that would actually sort of like say, you know, we are going to do something and actually stick to it. But over time, 18 years is a long time to be in power. The Conservatives and people wanted a change. So, along came a salesman called Tony Blair, who was around about in 1995, became leader of the Labour Party. Not too sure it was 95. And decided, Labour's not really going to win me the election, so what we're going to do is we're going to create new Labour, where we're going to sort of like have the traditional Labour voters, but we've got to get some of those Conservatives over. So he put on a suit and rebranded Labour to be this sort of like all-caring, all-smiling, grinning party. And people wanted a change, and they voted for New Labour. And as soon as they got in, he started lying. And why he's not a war criminal over Iraq, I do not know. To be replaced by Gordon Brown, who was an absolutely incompetent Chancellor. He inherited a very healthy economy and then promptly pissed it away. To the point where in 2010, when the general election happened, everybody was just fed up of politics. Couldn't trust Labour, couldn't trust the Tories. Lib Dems suddenly sort of like appeared on the scene, and people thought, sod it, we'll have a change. And they won a lot more seats than they should have, which caused a problem. So just to sort of like show that, this is 1997, 1979 I should say. We're onto the seesaw now. The Conservatives won. Conservatives came into power, won it by quite a large margin, held power for 18 years, did good things, did bad things, most governments did, but I still think they were the last government in this country, and probably will be for a long time, that were quite conviction based, and they might tell you stuff you didn't want to hear, but at least you could sort of like say, yeah, okay, I don't agree with you, but at least I respect what you're going to do. in regards to you're not going to flip-flop around and lie to me. 97, Labour won in a landslide. People were sick and tired of the Tories by that point. Blair came in, bright new future. Yeah, of course it was. This was the start of the spins, the spin doctors, who would basically manipulate the media, manipulate the press. They'd tell you something in the morning, change it in the afternoon if the public didn't like it. Basically, they were just salesmen. All they wanted was your votes. As soon as they gained any bit of power, they would do whatever they could to hold on to it. That involves really sort of like keeping. Well, they got into a bed with George Bush in America, and then religion came into it, and it just got messy and ugly, and people just got sick and tired. Where in 2010, the seesaw was balanced. The Lib Dems in the middle, they came third. Labour on the left, they came second, and Conservatives won, but not in overall power. So you had a hung parliament, which basically meant the Lib Dems had to pick a side to tip the seesaw. Because the Conservatives had the most votes, the Lib Dems decided to talk to them first, and that resulted in a coalition government of the Lib Dems and Conservatives. Now what that means, or what it has meant, is that the Lib Dems, even though they finished third, have a great degree of power, because they can sort of like say, well, again it goes back to the unions and the big businesses. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. You don't do what we say, we'll just shuffle along the seesaw to Labour, and you'll start losing the House of Commons. There'll be sort of like discontent in the House of Commons. Discontent in the House of Commons. You'll lose votes. You won't get your policies through, and basically, it's just a bit of a mess at the moment. At least it's not that big of a mess that Labour are in, because Ed Miliband is quite a useless leader, and we won't even talk about Ed Balls, because he really is a complete tosser. He married his missus. I met Ed Balls once, absolute arsehole, but that's just a personal opinion. And that's really it for sort of like modern politics. The main thing you've got to remember is, if this will go back, and it will in a moment, click, 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 click. Labour to the left, just think Labour, left. Conservatives to the right of centre. Working class is Labour, just think of Labour as working, funded by the unions. Conservatives are posh. I mean, you've only got to look at sort of like Cameron and Osborne, and you think, posh boys. You've only got to think of Labour. I mean, Labour, Ed Miliband, how posh is he? It's blurring of the line now between the two parties, and those are some of the dates which she's going to want to know about, particularly this one, because she does talk about New Labour quite a bit. But it'd be handy if you sort of like knew, if you just mentioned Thatcher conservatism, 1979, Labour coming into power in 97, coalition government, just those three really. And I think, just throw them down on a bit of paper, even if you don't think it's relevant, throw the dates down, it'll just be a tick. And that's the important thing. Going to do a little bit more, got an idea for some memory stuff for you, but that'll do for now, because I'm a bit bored, and if I'm bored, you're bored. Oh, and this is nearly 15 minutes, well, hope it was of help. You can always sort of like email me if you need any more depth on some of the stuff. I know I sort of like skirted over some of it, and I know I blathered through my way through some of it, but there you go. Right, bye bye.